We're continuing to talk about the value of automated ZOS performance change detection. I'm Todd Habakosh. John Baker's joining me. And so this use case is around CICS. Key CICS transaction metrics like CPU per tran rate, and tran response times are attractive candidates for change detection, so we can get an early heads up on significant changes that might be occurring in the transaction profiles. So in this use case, there's 3 transactions near the bottom of the screen that had increases, significant increases in CPU per tran.
Yeah, when you look at these, Todd, what kind of a couple areas that catch my eye, that the CPU time per tran right now very different in both of these. The rates are reasonably similar, but just the fact that they've changed substantially, which is what change detection is all about, whether or not they may be meeting their goal or whether or not the infrastructure can handle it, it's useful to be able to note these. So, I think from here you want to know, well, what's the common areas? Are there any common areas that these transactions might have in common?
Yeah, so a logical place I think to start will be to drill down by CICS Apple ID or region to see what the scope is of these increases in the CPU per tran. And when we do that, we see that it is the change is basically entirely attributed to a single region. The other regions just had very modest increases. And then, not surprisingly, this region also had a huge spike in response time that we see over on the right-hand side of the screen.
Yeah, this really narrows things down. Transactions can run across multiple regions, obviously, but in this case, you've got a single region. That can only be in one LPAR, so it helps to kind of focus your analysis from here on a specific address space.
That's right. So drilling then on that region to view the entire reference period, we see that the CPU per tran for this transaction was very constant over the entire period of time, except for this last day where we see a huge spike. So from here, then this other view, which focuses in on the last day, is very helpful. It shows that the CPU per tran was just in red there, just slightly below the average, the 30-day average, until it jumped up, spiked up dramatically around 11 a.m. and then remained at that really high level throughout the rest of this particular day.
Yeah, and just looking that this jumps up in the morning, so it's not something that necessarily happened overnight. CPU per tran is a nice normalizing number, even if transaction volume has changed. So actually, that springs to mind. Do we know about that? What about the transaction volume correlating against this?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So now that change detection has alerted us, now we'll use the rest of the capabilities of Intellimagic Vision to investigate this issue. So as John mentions, first thing here, CPU now is actually in blue and the tran rate is in red, and we can see the tran rate didn't change materially, so that's really not the driver here. The tran rate is modest anyway, but that was not the issue. So drilling in then into the CICS captures a dozen or so CPU buckets, and drilling into those in detail, we can see that the area in blue, which is the QRTCB time, was the primary driver of this change. And of course, QRTCB time has other implications, right, John?
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like about Intellimagic Vision. On the previous screen, you could be looking at your old type 30s and just know, that the quote unquote CPU time for this region is higher. But, what component of CPU time? And that's where these CICS 110 transaction records are so powerful, and seeing this through Vision, because QRTCB time, I believe, is going to be a single threaded type of delay, right, Todd?
Yes, exactly, across the region. So if that's going to be sustained, then that's going to be a matter of big concern, right?
Yeah. No other transactions are getting through in this guy.
Yeah. So then broadening out the time interval to the following day, we can see that then the CPU dropped as suddenly as it increased, right around 2 p.m. On the following day. And so knowing that this region is actually a test CICS region, then apparently something got introduced in the code that caused some problems. It was identified and then corrected the following day. So yeah, so again, we saw 3 transactions. They had similar profiles. They were in the change detection. They were executed on the same tests, CICS region. So, John, I think we're going to expect to see erratic behavior of transactions in dev test CICS regions. And what we really want to focus on is those changes that are sustained, because then we've got maybe problems coming in ahead in production, right?
Yeah, I mean, and having this nice, very clean time interval too. You can take this back to the test guys and say, hey, were you doing something right between here and here? And very likely you're going to get a positive answer. And they can correlate, maybe they were testing a new function, new application function, something like that. And you can say, well, this is what that function is going to cost as it written right now. Is that okay or not? I would say this is going to be pretty expensive in production. And I guess just to your second point there, yeah, obviously, if something like this were to happen in production, you would really want that change detection to notify you right away, because even for this period of time, I think would not be something you would want to have in production.
Right. So kind of is to take away from this particular use case is that, you're going to have a lot of deviations in dev test, and some are going to be just noise and other ones are going to be of interest. And so just you'll have kind of find a way to differentiate between the two. But again, that scenario to get an early heads up where there's a material change in the dev test environment that's headed into production, to get the heads up on that and be prepared either to remediate it or to have the CPU capacity or the regions configured appropriately to be able to handle that is going to be a real helpful heads up.
Yeah, absolutely. If this needs to go through as is, at least you can be aware and say, all right, well, maybe this trans going to run in its own region.
Exactly. All right, well, that's the end of this particular use case.